The next thing I heard was the loud siren of the police. I stared at my boyfriend and then back at the body that lay on the floor with anger in me. I slapped my boyfriend Jonathan with every bit of anger that was left in me before the police walked in to take him out. It had been 3 years since I told him that his anger was getting out of hand, and if he wasn't careful, it would lead to the end of many things, including our relationship. But growing up as a guy who only knew violence as the way to correct things, it was hard to change things, and I doubted it was going to be hard to change anything at all since he was now with the police. The night started out like any other night. We had said goodbyes to each other from the video call we had, and just when I was about to sleep, I heard a loud knock on the window, which made me scared for a minute until I realized it was just Jonathan.
For God's sakes, it's 12 o'clock in the morning.
I checked the clock that was on my dressing table for the time.
You should be asleep. You have morning shift tomorrow.
Jonathan looked at me thoroughly, and I could notice his eyes doing a secret glance into my room. I should have known that it was him not being comfortable, that I told him I was going to be home alone tonight. My roommate had to run a night shift at the hospital, which meant I had the house to myself since I worked at a restaurant and only had to go to work in the morning.
Jonathan, I told you that you need to trust me. All this sneaking in my room at weird hours is not it at all. It's really creepy in case you don't know, and it scares me. You also do it at night, which makes it too crazy to bear sometimes.
He ignored anything I said and then sat on my bed. He stared at the door for a good 5 minutes before eventually talking. I just wanted to be sure you weren't cheating on me. He looked nonchalant about it and acted like it was a normal thing to just walk into a room at 12 in the morning to be sure his partner wasn't cheating. I ignored him in anger and frustration at correcting him for the 100th time. If he was at least going to change, he could have done it a long time ago. I was just waiting for the perfect time to break up with him. It was hard having to deal with jobs and family at the same time. Talk less of dealing with his own excesses. I had slept for a few minutes when he suddenly woke me up again to ask what I would count as the most stupid question anyone could ever ask. Are you dreaming about another guy? I ignored him and turned to the other side of the bed. It was going to be too much stress answering him. How on earth could I have ended up with someone like him? And it had been 3 years of relationship with not even one break in between. I surprised myself sometimes. A very loud knock on the door woke me up quickly from the sleep that was most engulfing me, and I hissed in annoyance thinking it was Jonathan, just calling attention to himself. And not until Jonathan asked me if I was expecting someone, did I get up from the bed to answer the door. I got scared for a minute before answering the door, because I knew what Jonathan could do if it ended up being a guy. Beating up a guy was not too far from him. I opened the door slightly, and before I knew it or could understand what was going on, the door had been opened ajar, and the guy who stood in front of me, who had barely said anything, was on the floor, fighting for breath. I turned back to see Jonathan, who looked quite happy about what he had done. The look of satisfaction on his face was quite scary, and before I could say anything about it, he used the bottle in his hands again on the guy that was on the floor, already fighting for breath. I pushed him away from the body, and when I inspected who it was Nathan, my roommate's boyfriend. I called his name severally for him to wake up, but it was good as nothing trying to wake him up. He was dead. I turned around to see Jonathan with no look of remorse on his face, and without questioning or even trying to understand it, I walked past him to get my phone. I could not control it anymore. It was beyond me. I dialed the police on the phone and gave them the information, sneakily, just so Jonathan wouldn't know I was calling the police on him. He was going to kill me before I could even tell them what I wanted to, because it was obvious he had no mercy in him for people all in the name of love. How stupid that just sounded. Still in the process of trying to wake up Nathan as much as I could, Jonathan still stood there, telling me not to touch him because it meant I was cheating on him and would do more if the guy was still alive. I stared at him in disbelief before crying all over again. How could I have gotten myself into a mess as crazy as this? A few minutes later, the police arrived, and that was when half of the neighborhood woke up to check what was going on that could have warranted the attention of the police. Who wouldn't be worried if they suddenly heard the police at 1 o'clock in the morning? My roommate kept calling me. She probably had heard about the siren and wanted to ask if I was okay. How could I begin to explain that I was really okay and it affected her more than me? How? Jonathan looked at me in confusion when the police arrived, and just when he raised his hands to pull me closer to himself forcefully, all in the name of love or questioning, I moved away from him until the police arrived to handcuff him. I felt relieved for a while, but couldn't ignore the heaviness in my heart at the death of Nathan, and considering the fact that I would be the one to tell my roommate what happened and why it happened. She was going to hate me. I walked back into my room gently after everything went down and the whole neighborhood was quiet again. I couldn't sleep again in fear of Jonathan somehow reappearing to punish me for what I did. But amidst everything that happened, I had only one question in my mind. How exactly did I meet him? I turned and tossed in my bed for the answer to the question, and another one popped up. Why on earth did I meet him? I hated myself at the moment. Why? Why?
Hollywood is great and makes almost all girls believe in a love that's perfect, true, and without blemish. With this mindset, I said yes to Costello with the hope that he was going to be as perfect as my favorite Disney princess. The first week of the relationship was nothing less than perfect because he was protective, always ensuring that I was safe, and with guards everywhere I went just so he wouldn't hear anything that went wrong for some reason. Life was good, relationship was good, I loved love, and because of Costello, I made sure to keep loving love. Costello was a rich guy, always showering me with gifts, and anything I said I wanted, without taking a long pause to think about it, he was that amazing. Though I had not met anyone who I could say was his family, and he didn't talk about them as well, I didn't bother asking because I didn't want to feel like I was pressuring him to tell me things that he probably wasn't comfortable about or things he just wasn't ready to say. Get dressed, Mamacita. Wear your second best dress. I want you to save your best dress for the future. Something amazing is coming up, he said in a seductive voice over the phone. I loved the way he talked to me and the way he made me feel on top of the world. I'll pick you up in 2 hours, he said before hanging up. I had to be dressed perfectly or almost perfect since he wanted me to save the best for another day. I spent about 40 minutes on my makeup after having my bath. I checked the time I had and I had about 30 minutes to myself before he showed up. I sat quietly opposite the mirror, a big smile on my face unconsciously, and when I went back to my consciousness, Costello's name displayed with love emojis on my phone screen. I'm outside, Mamacita, he said sharply and hung up immediately. I checked the phone to be sure that he really hung up. Why? I picked up my bag and went out immediately to be sure everything was fine. He even came minutes early, which was weird because he always came at the exact time that he said. His black Bugatti La Voiture Noire shone brightly in the dark even without a light, and I knew that despite the fact that I actually loved Costello as a person, I loved his money as well. He was rich, wealthy, and I loved wealth and riches. Good combination if you asked me. He was quiet throughout the drive and only said a few words to whatever questions I asked. Poppy? I placed his free hand into mine and he pulled it away almost immediately, not making eye contact. I repeated the same action and he did the same thing again. What's wrong? I asked him sadly, but he said nothing. I kept quiet after that. This was probably a prank for where he was taking me. Different thoughts raced through my mind as I tried to understand what was going on with him. His phone rang and with a number that had no caller ID. He picked it up and only said 2 words to the person on the other line before hanging up. Almost there. He took a sharp turn to the right after the call towards an unfamiliar route. I asked him what was going on, but he still refused to say anything and only focused on his driving. The road was dark, quiet, and smelled of alcohol, cigarettes, and stale blood. He smirked in an evil manner as he drove further into the road. I kept asking him questions and he continued being silent until he parked the car in the middle of the road. I tried to open the door, something I felt I should have done before we got that far in the road. The door was stuck and no matter how much I tried to open it, it wouldn't open. I begged him quietly and then loudly, but he didn't hear anything I said. He got down from the car and then locked it. He went ahead to talk to someone who came out of nowhere. Costello kept pointing at me as he talked to the person. The person nodded as he told him things I couldn't hear. I got scared. Anything could happen because I didn't know what they could be planning for me. I tried to open the door again, but it didn't even move. My heart skipped a beat as the person Costello was talking to approached me slowly, and Costello walked into the dark. I guessed that a house was there, but I couldn't see it, which would explain where the other person came from. The person got to the door and opened the door, and I began struggling so hard to open easily. He placed a bag over my head before I could see my face and tied my hands and legs amidst my struggle to stop him. He removed the paper bag and placed a tape over my lips before quickly covering my face again, carefully enough so that I wouldn't notice his face. He carried me over his shoulders and walked towards an area that I couldn't use just my ears to discern. After a few minutes, he dropped me on the floor like I was a lifeless body. I screamed at the pain from the fall before hoping that even though Costello was one of them, he would still somehow save me from them. He says he loves me. I know he does, I thought to myself, and I used it to assure myself that nothing was going to happen. This is how far I can go, I heard Costello's voice, and then I didn't hear it again. I waited patiently to hear his voice again, but it didn't come. Everywhere was as silent as night, and I began to cry, begging them to show me mercy and just let me go, and would never say anything about any of this. They laughed at me. They told me I was a fool and just accept my fate, accepting whatever was going to come. I whimpered at every slight movement I felt towards me and calmed down again when I felt it all away from me, and it continued until someone eventually lifted me up from the floor and carried me over his shoulder again. I couldn't even beg whoever it was anymore. I was already tired from all the energy I'd burned while crying and begging them earlier. A familiar scent was picking up my nose. Costello? He was still there. Something in me made me happy at the thought that even though he was torturing me, the person that carried me removed the paper bag from my face and then the tape before taking off the ropes off my hands and my legs. I saw his face clearly, eventually, and a big smile was plastered on his face. The road became bright all of a sudden, and I saw Costello on the other side of his car laughing so hard. What's so funny to him? I was annoyed, waiting for him to explain what exactly was funny. He spoke up eventually, and I stared at him in disbelief. "April Fools," he said, and pointed at me while still laughing hard. I picked up my bag from his car and left, but not before yelling at him, "Damn you, Costello."
We're going to use red. It's Valentine's Day, not Halloween. Angela was the first to speak. It was 2 weeks until Valentine's Day, and with Angela as the chairperson of the high school's committee, everyone was under the pressure to make it perfect, as Angela would say. I stand for perfection and nothing less, always. Almost everyone in the school had one thing or another to do concerning the upcoming Valentine's party. The Great Valentine's Party of Delbador High School, the only party that could be talked about, or else it wasn't a party. Angela was always, and would probably always be, the chairperson of the committee till she graduated from the school. She had the characteristics of a leader, but a bossy one. And while she actually thought everyone liked her, many just tolerated her because she was dating the most handsome guy in school, and probably the most talented, Jason. "Go!" she yelled at everyone at the table before we all scrambled to find our way out of the meeting room. I didn't like or hate Angela, but she was not on my list of people to choose for life if I had to. She was pretty, yes, but a bully and a mean human being. Thinking about it, I wonder how her boyfriend coped with her. I went ahead with the job she had given me and some other people she grouped with me for publicity. Arrangements upon arrangements, yelling upon yelling of Angela, and Valentine's Day was eventually here. According to Angela, everyone had to wear a particular shade of red, and if they didn't, they wouldn't be allowed to go in, even if they had the most beautiful dress, which was almost impossible in my dictionary because no one would want to beat the dressing of Angela. They'd have to go the extra mile. Heels and glitter filled the hall as everyone walked in with their dates hand in hand and eyes locked on each other. When Angela walked in with Jason, it was as though everything stopped for a second. I could agree that she was probably the most beautiful girl to be made on planet Earth. Her skin, her eyes, her hair, and her dress were all perfect for her, like she was made for that particular moment, to shine among many others, the sunflower among lilies. "You're actually beautiful," I complimented her. "Yeah, I know. You were probably just blind before now," she said, her face void of any emotion. I saw Jason go almost numb beside her. I wondered how he was still with her, despite their behaviors being very different. He was the calm type, patient and friendly. And his girlfriend? Not so well. She was just a snake. She whispered something to Jason, who nodded his head. For a second, I wondered where she was going, because everything was already perfect, and there was nothing for her to correct anymore. The curious part of me pushed me to follow her silently, tiptoeing after her in the dark. The glitter on her cloth was the only thing producing light in the dark hallway. She looked back constantly to be sure no one was following her, and I stayed very quiet to be sure she didn't know anyone was following her. She walked into the boys' locker room. I was confused for a second. What could she want in a boys' locker room? Just a few feet into the room, and she pulled off her clothes, revealing her underwear and a larger part of her skin. I followed her silently into the room. She walked toward the only ray of light that was in the room. I saw a shadow seated on what looked like one of the chairs in the corner of the room. "Welcome," a voice said. The voice was very thick and sounded like one of the boys on the team, but I couldn't pin down who it was exactly. But I knew I'd heard the voice somewhere before. I heard Angela whimpering and crying silently while pleading at the same time in a very low tone. "Dad, please," she said. "Shut up and do what you ought to do," the voice said again. "Dad," I thought. I tried to peep. It was the first time I heard Angela vulnerable. She was always the bold one, never giving her feelings away or letting her feelings be trampled upon. But this time, I was hearing her cry, scream, in fact. And hearing Dad at the same time, it had to be a joke. I saw Angela on the floor with a man, having his back towards me, pinning thumbtacks all over her body. He kept on pinning them all over her as she bled and screamed. Then, what I saw next shook me to the core. "Coach Turner?" I said silently, but not loud enough for them to hear that someone was there. I ran out of the room immediately, but was stopped by a bigger figure who, after a couple of seconds of pause, let me go. I heard intense screams and a lot of hitting after that. I went back to see the lighted room full of commotion between Coach Turner and Jason. I pulled Angela to the side, comforting her. Seeing her like that, I could not control my tears. Coach Turner was helpless on the floor, with Jason giving him punches, until his friends picked him up before the whole situation turned into a murder. "How dare you!" he screamed at Coach Turner. "How dare you! You're plain heartless!" Amidst all this, I had dialed 911. The officers came after that to pick Coach Turner out of the school with handcuffs. How did Jason know? Why on earth was your father doing that to you? I asked Angela in the hospital. She only nodded to my questions amidst tears and pain. She told me that Coach Turner was not her biological dad like everyone thought, but her stepdad, and he'd been treating her like that ever since he got married to her mom. He had threatened her that if she speaks up, her mother would go through hell she would have never even heard of. Jason, being her boyfriend, had previously seen some minor marks on her body, but she would always tell him to calm down and things would eventually become better on their own. I hugged her again. How could she actually deal with all that and still manage to come out unshaken every day? No wonder she's always with the attitude, I thought. Jason walked into the room and hugged Angela, and I gave them some privacy to talk. Jason was the best boyfriend for her after all, and I knew he was going to help her through all the mess.